Today's lesson is why do women still change their names after marriage? Hello, everybody. Welcome to our program. I am Roger.
And my name is Helen.
And today we're talking about something called marriage or getting married. People actually still do that. Not as much as they did before, or at least young people are waiting later to get married. But Helen, you are married. Have you taken your husband's name?
Yes, I am. I'm married, but when I got married, I did not take my husband's name. And it wasn't really a conscious decision. It felt more natural to keep my own name, just as we do in Taiwan. Women, when they marry, they still keep their maiden names or the last name or the surname that they were born with.
Yeah, I think they actually have the choice here. I've met a lot of married women here who still go by the name of, say, Wang Xiaojie or Li Xiaojie or something, which is not common in the U.S. and other Western countries. When women get married, they become Mrs. somebody, usually Mrs. their husband's surname, Mrs. Smith or Mrs. Wilson, because that's her husband's name.
That's right. And this is a tradition that many women today still keep for various reasons. And it's also an issue that's interesting to think about. As a woman, do you want to adopt your husband's name or do you want to keep your own? And what does your decision mean? What does it say about your attitude toward the family, toward marriage, and toward your own identity, basically?
We do need to ask this question, though. Why do women still change their names after marriage? So let's get to it. Let's read the first part of our lesson right now.
Why do women still change their names after marriage? Walking down the aisle and saying "I do" to your true love is supposed to be one of the happiest events in your life. But for women in many countries, it comes along with the burden of having to contact numerous businesses and government agencies to alter personal information and acquire new identifying documents. These women are following the centuries-old tradition of doing away with their surname and replacing it with their husbands.
大家好，第一部分我们看到形容词 numerous， 意思是许多的，像是There were numerous reasons for the company's failure. 那间公司失败有很多原因，或是The school offers numerous choices for students interested in taking marketing classes. 这间学校提供许多选择给对行销课程有兴趣的学生。再来，我们看到单字 acquire， 这个字是动词，指取得、获得、购得，像是In order to acquire anything in the material world, money is key. 为了能在这物质世界中取得任何东西，金钱是关键。或是 Terry's company has acquired several cars to be used by employees. Terry 的公司买了好几台车子给员工使用。另外，除了上面的意思，这个字还可以指学到、养成。举例来说 After living in England for so long, Chris has acquired a British accent. 在英国住了这么久之后 Chris 有了英国腔。接着我们看到片语Do away with something, 表示废除、消除。例如 The restaurant decided to do away with some of the dishes that weren't very popular. 这间餐厅决定停止供应那几道不太受欢迎的菜色。或是 Ingrid decided to do away with the excess in her life and start over again. Ingrid 决定摆脱生活中多余的东西，重新开始。再来，我们看到名词 surname, 意思是姓氏，像是You only need to write your surname here, not your first name. 你只需要在这里写姓氏即可，不需要写名字。
So here, the first part says, walking down the aisle and saying, I do to your true love is supposed to be one of the happiest events in your life. So when you get married, what do? Usually your wedding takes place in a church, and in the middle of that church there is an aisle. There is that path that the bride and the groom walk down so that they can go to the front of the church, face the minister or the priest or the rabbi if you're in a synagogue, and you get married. So another way of saying to get married is to say to walk down the aisle. So here it says walking down the aisle, or to get married, and to say I do is supposed to be one of the happiest moments in your life. And usually people think about the event as a happy thing. But there are also a lot of other issues that you have to deal with when you get married.
Yeah, so of course the reverend there will ask you a question. Do you take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, or do you take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband? And you're supposed to say, I do. I do take this person as my lawfully wedded husband or wife. And yes, indeed, you're walking down that aisle. And yeah, it's supposed to be a really happy time in your life, but for women in many countries, it comes along with the burden of having to contact numerous businesses and government agencies to alter personal information and acquire new identifying documents. Yes, that is a burden. It is a hassle if you have to contact all of those government agencies and those offices and stuff like that to change or alter your personal information. Yeah, when you get married, you have to do that, especially if you are changing your surname.
That's right. Now, an agency in this context is an organization or department within the government that does a specific job. So another example of a government agency is the Environmental Protection Agency, or the EPA, which has the job of making sure that your environment is healthy and protected. But when you get married, you may have to go to other government agencies to acquire new identifying documents. So to acquire means to get possession of new identifying documents. So here, identifying is a verb being used as a verb to refer to the ability to say who someone is. For instance, a police officer might ask someone to identify the murderer or identify the robber in a particular situation.
Right, or if you don't know somebody on the street, you can say, hey, I don't know you. Please identify yourself. Tell me who you are. And of course, you can identify yourself with identifying documents. So here, identifying is serving to describe the word document, a document that will identify you, which could be your passport, your national ID, your driver's license, etc., etc. Those documents will identify you, but here they probably need some other documents like their birth certificate or something like that. So in this particular case, these women are following the centuries-old tradition of doing away with their surname and replacing it with their husbands. So yes, it's a centuries-old tradition, especially in Western countries and probably in other countries in the world as well. It's been going on for many hundreds of years. And here we've got a phrase, to do away with something. You could also say to get rid of something. So for example, I could say the government has a new policy to do away with poverty.
Right. Another example is in Japan. Recently, the government is considering doing away with using chops or 도장 because with COVID-19, they are realizing that people presenting themselves at government agencies with their chops to prove their identity has become a little bit difficult because of social distancing. So that's another example of to do away with. And surname, of course, is another word for last name.
Exactly, your surname, okay? So Mr. Smith, okay? Smith is his surname. You get the idea. And that, of course, is a tradition that's been going on for hundreds of years. And yes, Helen, you said that when you got married, you did not do away with your surname. You kept it.
Yes, I kept it, even though I knew that I would be walking down the aisle just once in this lifetime. I'm not going to get a divorce and get married again. But I felt that it was important to retain my father's name, the name that my father gave me, and to remember my identity that way. And I didn't feel that it would make me any less of a dedicated wife.
Indeed. So, yeah, it doesn't sound strange to me that the husband's surname is different to the wife's surname. Okay, that brings us to the end of the first part of our lesson for today. Let's move on now to the second part. We will listen first.
This practice originated in early modern England as part of what were called coverture laws, which decreed that, upon marriage, a husband and wife were considered to be one, the one being the husband. Once married, all of a woman's legal rights were transferred over to her husband, and she could no longer own property, sign contracts, get an education against her husband's wishes, or earn and keep her own salary. These laws began to be repealed in the 19th century, but their effects have never fully disappeared. Unfortunately, women in some U.S. states still have difficulty asserting their rights. They are, however, now permitted to keep their own names.
第二部分，我们看到单字 originate 这个字是动词，指发源、起源，像是 Researchers are trying to find out where the virus originates from. 研究人员正试图找出这个病毒是源自哪里，或是 The storm originated in the northern Atlantic. 这个暴风来自北大西洋。另外，这个字去掉字尾 ate 就成了名词 origin， 指起源、出处。例如 Teddy told me all about the origin of the moon festival. Teddy 告诉我与中秋节起源相关的一切。或是 The origin of the painting could not be determined. 这幅画的出处无法确定。再来，我们看到动词 decree， 指规定、命令、颁布，像是The government decreed a law against holding prisoners without a charge. 那个政府颁布一项法令，没有指控，禁止关押犯人。最后，我们看到单字 assert， 这个字是动词，指主张、要求权利、维护，像是 Rose asserted her free thinking by challenging all of her university professors in class. Rose 主张自由思想，挑战她大学课堂上的所有教授。
And welcome back. So today we're talking about why women still change their names after marriage. Why does this custom still continue? And to answer that, we're going to look at the history of this practice. And it says here, this practice originated in early modern England as part of what were called coverture laws, which decreed that upon marriage, a husband and wife were considered to be one. The one being the husband.
Okay, so this is kind of a long sentence here, so let's break it down into smaller parts here. First of all, let's talk about this verb to originate. It describes where something comes from in the verb form, okay? Where did the compass originate? Well, the compass originated in China, for example. So here, of course, this particular practice of the bride taking her husband's surname, this practice originated in early modern England. Okay, so that's basically where it came from. And what did they say? Well, they decreed that the wife was supposed to take her husband's name. So here we've got the verb to decree. What exactly does that mean?
Well, usually a king or a queen or a monarch decrees a law or some rules that they expect people to follow. And in this particular case, coverture laws were decreed by authorities in early modern England, and the law stated that women had to take their husbands' names after marriage.
And once married, all of a woman's legal rights were transferred over to her husband, and she could no longer own property, sign contracts, get an education against her husband's wishes, or earn and keep her own salary. Sounds pretty limiting there, but indeed her legal rights were transferred over to her husband. So here we've got the verb to transfer. Some people will pronounce this transfer. I say transfer myself, both as a noun and a verb. That just means something goes from one place to another, especially if you're in a company, you might want to get a transfer to another department, or if you're in university, you might want to transfer to another school that has a better department for what you want to study.
Right. You could also transfer something. So I could say something like, after I finished cooking the fish, I transferred it from the pan to a plate. So here, what is being transferred? Women's legal rights. Now, what are legal rights? How do you quantify or explain what legal rights are? Usually, they can be in the form of property ownership. So you might own houses. Those are legally your houses. You can sign contracts. You can get an education. And these are your legal rights. However, under the coverture laws, women were no longer able to do these things because they are against the law. Unless the husband says, yes, my wife can do this, my wife can get an education, she can improve her mind, I don't mind it, it's fine. So those were the part of the situation of marriages before the 19th century.
Exactly. Okay. So yes, she belonged to her husband there, and she could not do anything against his wishes. So here we've got this phrase, against someone's wishes, which means it's doing something when the other person doesn't agree or does not approve of that. So for example, I have some friends, Teddy and Lisa, and they ran off to get married in Las Vegas against their parents' wishes. So I guess the parents never wanted to talk to them again.
That's too bad. Well, these laws began to be repealed in the 19th century, but their effects have never fully disappeared. So basically, even though women no longer by law had to adopt their husbands' names, it became sort of a tradition, a custom, and women just continue to, well, not all women, a lot of women continue to adopt their husbands' names after they got married. So it became a custom even though the laws began to be repealed. So to repeal something is to officially state that a law no longer exists.
Now, moving on to the next sentence here, it says, unfortunately, women in some U.S. states still have difficulty asserting their rights. It kind of depends on where you are in the United States, as some states have different laws about this. And if you assert your rights, you come out and say, hey, that's my right, I deserve that. So in this particular case, to assert means to be assertive, to be aggressive, to be proactive, and to try to get what you think you deserve. And we're talking about certain rights in certain U.S. states. They are, however, now permitted to keep their own names. So they can do that in pretty much all the states in the United States. But of course, they have difficulty asserting rights in other areas. But at least they don't have to take their husband's name if they don't want to, especially if it's a weird sounding name like Mr. Kringle or something like that. Who wants a surname like that? Okay, let's move on now to the third and final part of our lesson for today. We'll listen first.
So why would women today choose to continue a tradition that has such an awful past? The answer is that while laws have changed, society hasn't changed much.
So a lot of women today still adopt their husbands' names after they get married, even though they don't have to anymore because those old laws have been repealed. So why would women today choose to continue a tradition that has such an awful past? The answer is that while laws have changed, society hasn't changed much. So I think that's quite true in many countries, even though it's now illegal to do certain things that are considered not beneficial to a part of society. People continue to do it because it's become custom.
Yeah, and I'm imagining maybe some women want to take a new surname to kind of let other men know that they're no longer available. Quit chasing after me. I'm taken. I'm married. Leave me alone. Okay, that brings us to the end of our lesson for today. It's time now to listen to our Chinese teacher.
各位同学大家好，我是 Hanny， 我们来看今天的文法重点。课文一开始写到，走上红毯，对着真爱说出我愿意，应该是生命中令人感到最幸福的其中一件事了。好，那么文中有用到 be supposed to 加上原形动词的句型来表达应该是怎么样怎么样，我们就来学它几种常见的用法。好，第一种呢，可以表达说预期会发生的事，用来表达预期啊，或是认为某人或某事物应该会怎么样。那这时候我们 be 动词会用现在式，例如 Everyone is supposed to meet at the entrance at 7 a.m. 所有人应该在早上7点在入口碰面。好，第二种是表达说原本应该要怎么样却没有这么做。好，那它是用来表达说认为过去应该会发生某事，但实际上却没有发生。这时候它的 be 动词是用过去式，例如 We were supposed to meet 20 minutes ago. 我们原本应该20分钟前碰面的，但却没有。第三个用法可以表达说某人有责任或义务做某事，像是 You're supposed to respect your elders. 你应该尊重长辈，这是你该做的，这是你的责任。好，那么第四个是表达说一般认为怎么样，大家都说怎么样，像是 Their cheesecake is supposed to be the best in town. 大家都说他们的 cheese 蛋糕是镇上数一数二的。好，那这边有一个动词用到的是 acquire， 它是用来表达取得、获得。我们来学习它的字首字根。好，我们看到 quest 或者是拼作 quer 还有 qui 这些字根呢，表示寻找、询问的意思。而在 acquire 这个字当中，它的字首 ac 是来自 ad， 只是因为 ad 碰到 cq 的时候会拼成 ac。 好，那这个字首是用来做强调，那么 quire 表示寻找、获得，合在一起 acquire 就表示获得、得到或者是习得。这个习得通常是指说靠自己的努力逐渐培养、习得某一种新的技能或是能力等等。那我们顺便补充几个有这一类字根的单字。第一个是 inquire， 好，它的字首 in 表示进入，字根 quire 这个部分表示询问，进去里面询问，进入其中去寻找答案，这样应该很容易联想到 inquire 它有询问、打听的意思。第二个补充的是 require， 好，它的字首 re 表示一再，字根 quire 表示求取，一再的求取应该很容易联想到 require 它有要求、需要的意思。那么第三个补充的是 conquest， conquest， 好，它的字首 con 表示完全，那么字根 quest 表示寻求。当我们追求的是完全取得所有的事物，寻求对所有人事物的完全掌控，用这样的方式也许可以联想到这个 conquest 它有征服、征战或是占领的意思。好，以上是今天重点整理，我们回顾今天的单字吧。
Numerous. Peter has made numerous unsuccessful attempts at dieting. Agency.The government agency responsible for environmental issues is looking for new employees. Acquire. The property manager acquired 4 new houses for his client this year. Identify. Even though there were many people in the crowd, Carl was able to identify his wife. Document. Your passport is one of the most important documents you can own. Transfer.After Hugo died, control of his company was transferred to his son.
Well, that brings us to the end of another edition of our program, and please make sure you join us again next time. From all of us here, I am Roger.
I'm Helen.
See you next time.